Welcome to the story of Millie Salmon and the Infinite Shop. This is Chapter 2, The Bright City. Millie is going to get to know a bit more about her family and Grandpa's shop. The story will be read by me, Ray Dubicki. Hopefully I hit the right tone for Pat's love of cheesesteaks. You can join Millie Salmon on Patreon or find more at milliesalmon.com, and you can follow this podcast and other stories on social media at Infinite Shop Limited. Chapter 2, The Bright City. Predictably, by Wednesday, the wind had turned chilly. Millie made the strategic mistake of putting charm bracelets and sweater on in the wrong order. She was still picking odd metal and glass shapes out of the tight knit as she worked her way to breakfast. That problem would solve itself if you weren't trying to look like a disco fish tank, Dad poked. It didn't even elicit a passing glance. She was using her right hand to pick out charms from the left. He started working on the right, unbuttoning 2 charms and an extra loop from Millie's left cuff. The nuns let you get away with this many bracelets? You don't pay for parochial school. Well, then what are you rebelling against? Why so many bracelets? To advertise all the wild sex I've had to potential mates. It's peacocking, Millie poked back. Indeed. Let's snip some of those feathers. Pick 2. The point is to show the point is no. This is out of hand and wrist. Pick 2. Millie thought for a second. I'll split the difference with you. Days of the week on one arm, weeks of the month on the other. How many do you have right now? 18 on the left, 21 on the right. Why uneven? I have an odd number of bracelets. I'll go as high as 6 total at school. Renegotiate for weekend activities. And Mom will make the bake sale submission? Fine. Nice doing business with you. She undid all but 2 of the bracelets, and he knew he had been had. Pat's, Reggie, and Millie slouched through school and escaped instrument practice with only minor scarring. Sunsetting curfew had only inched earlier by a minute or 2, but twilight feels darker when it is chillier, and Millie found herself wanting to be inside. Without even deciding, they decided where they would be going. They walked into Grandpa's bookstore. Firth was behind the counter, but starting to put things into his bag. He was the gaunt high schooler who helped out for Grandpa 3 days a week. Black hair, always finely combed, and graceful thin fingers, but such impossibly long arms and legs that he always looked like a ladder unfolding. It was getting close to his quitting time. He had a long walk to get back to his house. She wasn't sure what part of town he had to get through, but he always complained that it was a pretty long way, and even the bus stop wasn't close. He pointed them towards the big room, behind the extra space and next to the section with books about insects. They were constantly moving the comic books. Grandpa said it was to make sure that important new titles were properly displayed and coordinated with the long lineage of their storylines. Millie just thought they were bored and liked to move things around. She heard Grandpa coming down the interior stairs from his apartment. He relieved Firth behind the counter and settled into his tall chair. Firth waved at her, pulled a heavy jacket around his shoulders, and headed out the door. It was chilly, but not nearly that cold. Maybe his neighborhood was on top of some mountain, and a yak would be joining him for the climb. Grandpa stuck his head around the corner to check on them, interrupting the boys' bickering about what boxes they would be searching and potentially which issue each would be purchasing. Hi, Grandpa, they all said. Hi, Quibby. Hello, gentlemen. How was school today? He used his nickname for his real-life granddaughter. He said when Millie was little, she reminded him of a pet bunny the family had named Quibby. Terrible but entertaining, Millie said. The teacher's refrigerator broke sometimes who knows when, and the boys' gym teacher got E. coli after his breakfast burrito was bad. Ambulances and everything. They delivered lunch from nearby restaurants so they could locate the source of the disease. I had a cheesesteak sub, Pats volunteered. It was delectable. You gentlemen didn't have anything to do with that broken appliance, did you? He looked over his glasses at each of the boys. Absolutely not, Pat said. He played dumb at school, but never with Grandpa. Also, Pats was so afraid he would get into trouble for something he had nothing to do with. It was an old fridge and, oh God. Reggie had no such fear. I have an alibi, he said. Grandpa leveled his gaze on Reggie for another second, then grinned. I'm sure you do. Reggie returned the smile, putting so much mischief into it that it gave him a cavity. Grandpa left them to their browsing. It's easy to get lost in any bookstore, but particularly Grandpa's. It's a warren of old rooms that carved itself out of a series of rooms, offices, and maybe even a furnace on the first floor of their apartment building. When an extra shelf was needed, a closet stopped being a closet. When new tables were required, a hallway no longer was a hallway. The wide tables were covered in boxes full of loose papers. Towards the front today, this was sheet music. There was a doorway that was made wider by a former owner, where the shelves narrowed and then spaced apart into a neighboring room. This room had an assortment of magazines. On all sides were more high shelves of books. The room tapered in again. Today this opened into a third room full of comics, and one chair. Millie took it upon her own initiative. The boys hunched and began flipping through boxes. Millie watched the boys for a few more minutes before she was watching them through closed eyelids. It was a completely normal afternoon dream. A little too vibrant to be real life, but a little too absurd to be completely fiction. The rows of boxes filled with comics started to sing. All the holes for handles started to move like lips. When one of the boxes went off key, they all stopped, and the others started to spit back issues at the offender. Then they all started singing again, enunciating properly and at perfect pitch. Firth crossed the room on skis. Somewhere in her dream, she heard the boys' voices. They were frantic and checking their watches, which were suddenly stopwatches attached to long cords that they pulled out of the pocket of vests. What dapper vests, she thought. These were not school uniform vests. They were purple satin. They don't allow that, but they should. Satin vests are very nice. She waved at them and told them to have fun down that rabbit hole. She woke up with a jump. The boys were gone. Grandpa was gone. The lights were turned low. The only sound she could hear was the low hum of the ancient ventilation system that Grandpa continually complained about. It was dead still to the point she could almost see the stacks of paper and old music breathing. She was in the bookstore alone. She checked her phone. 8 o'clock on the nose. She was late. She looked again. It was 8 p.m. and 2 calls from home. She was very late. She ran to the front door and opened it. Instead of being as dark as she expected, the bright orange sun beamed into the shop, unsettling the papers and pouring warmth into the chilly room. As Millie's eyes adjusted from the hazed bookstore to the open urban panorama, the view was something fantastic. It was gleaming white buildings and a shimmering blue sky. Where the cafes across the street should have been, there was a wide boulevard stretching to a glowing in the distance. It was not more city. It was a wall, dark and craggy. It was a cliff broken only by a wide ribbon of honey golden glass pouring over its edge. She put her foot on the threshold and tentatively put her head past the edge of the door to look down the street in either direction. To her right, she expected to see Hudson Street. Instead, that was an open channel of water as wide as a river and perfectly clear. It was full of stately silver ships, cruising as gracefully as cars do not. One lifted itself from the stream and made a left turn down the street in front of Millie. It did not make a sound, nor did it touch the ground. The ship looked like a fat sparrow, with bulging belly tapering to a small pointed beak at the front and a flat plank in the rear. The top and sides were a dome, transparent but swirled with rainbows like a puddle in a parking lot after the rain. She saw people, about 6 of them inside. Her eyes followed the fat silver bird past the doorway. To her left, where she expected to see an alley and dumpsters, she looked down the canyon of buildings, leading towards one taller than all the others. From the street in the distance rose a twisting blue-green spire, lit golden on the side facing the sunset. It dwarfed all the other buildings and culminated in a beacon, flashing, shining, and rotating, all at the same time. It was a glorious lighthouse and must have been seen by the entire world. That's when she noticed that her own building, the one shared by the shop and the handful of apartments above it, was no longer beige painted brick. Just like the buildings across the street and down the channels, it was pearl white with the shifting gold pink highlights in the remnant setting sun. She touched the outside wall. There were no seams for bricks or stones, just one solid body of a building that, looking upward, seemed to go to the sky, having erupted straight from the ground in a single piece, like a tooth. A hand put itself on her shoulder. She tensed from the startle before Grandpa pulled her away from the door and closed it in front of her. There was an satisfying click that locked the crazy away outside. Millie tried to turn the doorknob to the apartment slowly. Part of her didn't want to disturb Mom and Dad or notify them of her very lateness. The other part just wasn't sure what she was going to find on the other side of a doorway. It would be interesting, but Millie didn't know if she would be ready for the door to her house to open into a chasm of snakes or onto some interstellar warship full of green men with tusks. The possibilities were endless now. There was no disturbing Mom and Dad. They were standing on the other side of the door as she opened it. The tusk men may have been preferable. "It's almost 9, Millie," Dad started. The door opened a bit wider and Dad saw Grandpa. He was not going to correct his own father in the same way he corrected his daughter, but Dad was about to have a couple questions. "Someone dozed off in the shop," Grandpa started, "and we had a little detour on the way back home." "Detour?" Mom asked. Dad lowered his voice. "Back home." The front edge of his sharpening hairline was getting that red halo that only formed when he ate really spicy Thai food or had spent the day helping someone move furniture. They already knew, or they were quickly figuring it out, more likely. Millie was ready for the chasm of snakes now. By the time Grandpa had finished explaining, they had taken positions in the kitchen. Grandpa and Mom were across from each other at the dining table. They were at the end closest to the counter where Dad stood, leaning, and very close to the coffee maker. At the far end of the table, feeling it was the very far end, Millie sat, ever shrinking. The wood of the table was a deep burgundy streaked with thick grains of darker maroon. The chairs were stained to match, and the entire set was pretty substantial. Millie traced the beveled edge of the table, the two bumps that ran along the edge before flattening and rounding to the corner. Her finger traced the lines in the table around the grooves that were carved with the sharp end of a very skilled chisel, the folds that were already there. Her finger followed the curves, and she repeated to herself, the folds were already there. Grandpa had said something as he pulled Millie back into the shop. "You don't get to move very fast in this universe without a lot of power or being very tiny," he said. "But the universe has perforations, folds, and if you look at distance as being a folding problem instead of a pushing problem, things become very simple." "How simple?" she asked. "Well, you just did it," Grandpa had replied. In the dining room, her finger moved around the parts of the flat table that were not so flat. Grandpa explained to Mom and Dad, "By the time I saw the lights come on and got downstairs, she was already out to the street. Almost ran out in front of a late model Pitzel Flash." "She ended up at Dalabrator?" Mom asked. "Was that the last connection of the evening?" "No, thankfully," Grandpa replied. "The last connection was Clarsh 9. They're running street sweepers tonight." Mom didn't like that answer. Dad hadn't heard that last part. His face had returned to a better color after hearing Dalabrator. His eyes regained perspective from silently staring long through the far wall during the entire course of the conversation. He looked at his little girl. "What did you think of it?" he asked hazily. What did you think of Dallabrator? I don't think I've ever seen something so beautiful, Millie whispered to the table. The city was so bright and perfect. It looked like a hole was carved into the world just to set this precious white diamond. And then there was the lighthouse in the middle, burning blue, and just before we left, the whole place burned gold, just for an instant, and it looked like someone poured the sun over the edge of the cliff. Mom smiled and turned to Grandpa. Today's a long day, isn't it? You saw Dalboot and Haas, the fiery falls. Dad was a little wistful before giving a little snort. That city's far from perfect, my dear. One day people will realize that and start cheering for real teams. Mom swiped her hand at Dad, who appeared to be calming. He offered Millie and Grandpa dinner, but neither was hungry. Grandpa spent only a few more minutes before excusing himself and heading out. That left Millie to face the firing squad alone, but they didn't seem quite so agitated as when she had walked into the door. Dad let out a long sigh and went to sit at the table. Go take your shower, Millie. It's late. Are you going to talk about me? We have to. You came home very late. I want to be here while you talk about me. What Millie meant was that she needed Dad to begin with his standard, "What are we going to do with you?" line for establishing discipline. The rare times it had been applied, Millie had missed calling in by 20 minutes, once, and had her computer open after lights out, once by an hour, once the entire night. Dad's line would prompt Millie to discuss her own impression of what her punishment should be to establish a good starting point for negotiating before Mom compromised to some reasonable average. But Mom actually began talking. You are expecting this to be an issue of discipline. You are expecting to be punished for being late coming home or not calling or something. You expect us to set out a pretty harsh week of early returns home and cut computer time. Well, yes, that was exactly what Millie had been expecting. She had some ideas on how to use her time. Her parents would expect her to be studying in her room. That might also include working up good justification for going back to the bookstore. It could evolve into visiting one of the other places the thing could go, or at least get herself into a clearer state of mind about everything that happened. Her opening offer was going to be a Sunday to Sunday deal, including relinquishing control of the remote, as well as severely limiting online time with Reggie. We're not going to punish you, but we are not going to let you go to the shop without one of us. Millie was aghast. She squeaked out, How is that not a punishment? Because it's a safety precaution. Is it a punishment to tell you not to play in the middle of traffic? No, this is the same thing. And knowing how the shop treats you, or more importantly, not knowing, is very similar to a speeding truck. And, Mom continued, I think it goes without saying that you can't breathe a word of this to Reggie or Pats, or anyone at school, or anywhere. This is for you and Grandpa and us. So I'm supposed to keep it secret that there is a superdimensional elevator in the basement of my apartment building controlled by my grandfather, and I'm not allowed to visit it, talk about it, or even look at it without your express written permission? Dad sighed. It's only an elevator in appearances, dear. The shop is much more complex than that. How do you know that? Mom looked at Dad and flexed her fingers in a way to suggest he shut up. He did. Mom rebutted, Express written permission is not going to let you into the shop. Only one of us. You are going to have to check in with your father after school and tell him exactly where you're going to go. If you have no plans, you stay home. I haven't done that since I was 10 years old. How is this not a punishment? Because between the ages of 10 and 12, you showed yourself to be trusted enough to show up for dinner on time and not be skipping across the universe. We set the 10-block limit. Alternate star systems are outside of that 10 blocks. The rule still stands as before. And until we can trust you to continue to obey it, you will check in with an afternoon itinerary. She wasn't getting any saving glances from Dad. Mom's rule was standing, and Mom had backup on this one. Regardless, Millie emphasized her frown and stomped back to her room as hard as possible, and punctuated with a door slam for good measure. Millie folded her arms across her chest and flopped face down into bed. It wasn't nearly as soft as a golden waterfall, but it absorbed her completely. Fully dressed and so very angry, Millie fell asleep and had strange dreams about fat pigeons and very alien lighthouses. Jules and Stony Salmon watched their little girl age a whole lot in one conversation. From the first few minutes, she went back and forth between a helpless child who knew too much and a teenager who knew far too little. By the time Grandpa had left, Millie had settled uncomfortably close to the older end. After Millie stomped away and they fought the urge to follow, Jules walked around to the other side of the counter and finished up the last dishes from dinner. He scraped the leftovers into plastic things and put them into the fridge, and then left the stew pot in the sink to soak. Stony finished her tea and then headed to bed. They both laid awake for a while before anyone spoke. It was Jules that broke the silence. "We moved here because we wanted a quiet life, because we didn't want her dragged across the cosmos, or worse." "I was her age when I started working at the shop. So were you." "It wasn't quite the same anything as when we were there. We changed it from the bookstore into the shop. We made it in a way that she could not follow." Stony continued her husband's thinking. "And she isn't us. Worse, she is both of us. Do you know who would want to get their hands on her?" Jules shook at the idea. Then he shook at his own reticence. "It's something she's dead set on doing. She wants to get back in there. I worry we're not going to stop her. She has already been through." They didn't say anything for a while. Jules heard Stony smile. "Could you imagine seeing Dalabertor for the first time on Dalbuten Haas? We know the shop will carry her." "It must think she's one of us," Jules said. "Hopefully," Stony said. The word had some extra weight. An idea bounced around in Stony's mind for a moment. How much does Millie think she's us? How much does Millie know about us? It was cut short by Jules running a parallel, but not exact thought. How can we portray to her the dangers that are out there? I mean, what happens if that snot-nosed Captain Listing gets a hold of her? She could get stuck on his planet, any planet, picked up and taken to prison, left behind in a cave. We are simply not sure how the shop reacts to her. The one possibility crossed his mind, and Jules couldn't even breathe the name. He couldn't let it pass his lips. But she heard it. Stony thought hard about that for a moment. "That XL Fect is not going to get her. Look at me." She sat up and held Jules' face to hers. "They will not get Millie. See, I don't think that's the problem. Millie's not going to get abandoned or have some shop malfunction. If anything, the shop seems to act too well for her." This was Millie Salmon and the Infinite Shop, Chapter 2, The Bright City. In the next episode, Millie and her parents will have an extremely calm discussion about getting back to the shop. Thank you for listening. You can find more about Millie at milliesalmon.com or join us on Patreon. Please like, subscribe, and leave a review on whichever podcast app you use. Millie Salmon and the Infinite Shop is a production of Infinite Shop Limited, which you can follow on all social media platforms. I'm Ray Dubicki. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to reading some more for you soon.